This is my analysis of the Democratic CBS debate, and I want to make a few quick points here, general points. Usually these Democratic debates are about promoting the candidates instead of destroying them, as opposed to the ones that we see from the Republicans. But in this case, the moderators tried to show the differences between the candidates, but the candidates don't answer the follow-up questions, and the moderators abandon the process. The real problem with the debate is that you don't get into the reasoning that supports the differences, and that none of the candidates ever identify any principle which you can use to show the difference between these candidates, and you can use to determine what the truth is, which is the right policy when they do have a difference. Interestingly enough, in many areas they all agree there's just shades of differences. So in redistribution of wealth, they all agree with the redistribution of wealth, but there's just shades of differences. And like Bernie Sanders wants to redistribute more than Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton wants to redistribute, I guess, more or less the same amount as O'Malley. On some of the humorous aspects of this debate were when Sanders said that climate change is caused by terrorism. Excuse me, I keep saying that wrong, right? Yeah, actually that was right. Climate change is so alarming, is what causes terrorism. I mean, how do you make that connection? Only Bernie Sanders can. And also, when asked about his policy to raise minimum wage and whether it would raise the unemployment, he says, well, all public policies have negative consequences, so what's the matter? What does that matter? Well, that's the whole point. If you're worried about people's earning a livelihood, if they're unemployed, they earn zero. On that point, Hillary Clinton said that she denied the law of supply and demand, and that it didn't apply in the field of labor. So if you raise the price of labor, you will still have the same amount of labor, which is demand for labor, the same amount of jobs available, which is a violation of the law of supply and demand, and everybody knows that that can't be. If that were the case, then you could raise it to whatever number you want and forever. On redistribution of wealth, I said that they all agree with redistribution of wealth, and the underlying premise for redistributing wealth is that the person that produces the property doesn't own it, as I said before, and therefore the property really belongs to everyone, and redistribution of wealth is perfectly moral because all you're doing is allocating what belongs to everyone in a different way. Of course, Bernie Sanders would allocate it, would take more from the rich. He said 90% would not be, he would not implement Eisenhower's 90% tax, which was the result of the World War II expenditures. Anyway, that's a great comfort that we don't look forward to 90% increase, up to 90% increase in how much taxes you have to pay. So regarding the topic of the day, which was the terrorism and foreign policy, they really did not discuss the main issues in this topic, which are deterrence versus preemption. Those are the two theories that are trying to overcome each other or go against each other, and that is what determines what foreign policy we have. And when we went to Iraq, we went there based on preemption. So they were not an imminent threat. They had not attacked us. Hillary Clinton was in favor of it. she admitted that it was a mistake. So you would think that Bernie Sanders would be less of an interventionist. But it turns out not necessarily, because he's bought into the idea that ISIS is a problem and he's going to get everybody to cooperate, he says. But he doesn't answer what happens if they don't cooperate, what happens if they will not assume the responsibility that he wants them to. What does he do then? He doesn't answer that. So, regarding the basic issues on foreign policy, it's self-defense versus other interests. So the idea is, should you only go to war when you are attacked or in imminent threat of attack, or should you go to war also for other reasons, like humanitarian reasons, or oil, or what they call interest? We don't like this group, we like the other group, whatever, or this group seems to be better, the other one is worse, etc. It's basically a conflict between a non-interventionist policy, which would be based on self-defense, and the world unpaid policeman policy, where we assume the responsibility for getting rid of all the bad actors. And all of these candidates were willing to go to war whenever there's a terrorist threat like ISIS. And so that is one of the things that we have to discuss more in depth, and I will, because they did not explain what terrorism is and what should be our foreign policy regarding terrorism, etc. Hillary Clinton did say that she was asked about whether she underestimated ISIS, and she evaded that question and wouldn't really come out and say, well, yes, ISIS is the JV. And guess what? ISIS is the JV team compared to France, Russia, United States, China, all the nuclear powers, plus all the intermediate powers. ISIS does not have an air force or a navy. And they haven't been able to defeat Assad or the Iraqi government yet. And even if they did, big deal. Now, on this point, it's very interesting, because Bill Maher and Trump both agree that if ISIS and Syria have a war, so what? What does it have to do with us? And if Putin wants to get involved, who cares? I think it's interesting that these two personalities agree on this common sense view, which is, this does not affect us. Why do we have to get involved? But none of the candidates, the Democratic candidates, took this, let's say, peacenik approach or non-interventionist approach. They're all gung-ho into getting involved. And that's bad news for everyone in case the Democrats win. Now, I want to talk about terrorism, because that was really the basic topic, the first topic, and nobody really explained the basic truths about terrorism. So let's take a moment to do that, at least. Terrorism is when murderous thugs kill people, innocent people, for a political objective. That's what the people in ISIS did. And that when they bombed in Paris, which, by the way, I offer the condolences to all those people that died and their families. But I would like to get into what is the cause. Why do groups like the IRA, the Irish terrorists, or the Basque terrorists, or the Chechen terrorists, or Al-Qaeda, or ISIS, why do they commit terrorist acts? And the reason has nothing to do with envy of us, or they think that they can conquer the world. All of these terrorists know that bombing a few people or shooting down a Russian airplane is not going to destroy Russia. Or these attacks in Paris will not destroy France. They aren't going to win a war against France. They don't even have close to the armaments necessary to win a war with France. It all has to do with their attempt, their immoral and criminal attempt to persuade France, Russia, or the United States to have a different policy. What is it that they're trying to persuade us to do? Not get involved in their war. They're in an all-out war now with Syria and Iraq. And we are helping their adversaries. So obviously, they don't like it, and it's bad for them. And the only thing that they can think of is to try to persuade us that the cost of us being involved against them in these two wars that they have is too high. Now, what we have to think is what's in our self-interest. They don't want us to be involved, but the fact that they are murderous thugs doesn't mean that we shouldn't, that we should just do the opposite of what they want us to do. What they want us to do could be in our self-interest, and determining whether it's in our self-interest is what we should be talking about. It doesn't matter what they want. They could want something that is good for us. So if it's good for us, we should do it. And good for us in this case is to have a non-interventionist policy like our founding fathers had, instead of trying to be the world policeman. A good policy for us would be to follow the Constitution and only use war in the common defense of the states. That's what a good policy would be, instead of falling into this idea that we have to pursue all the monsters around the world and slay them. And a lot of politicians like that, because that gives the politician a lot of power. Creating an exterior enemy is an old formula for increasing the power of whatever government's involved. Reducing the citizens' rights, taking their resources, and accumulating more power because, of course, it's a big threat. The monster is going to kill you. But ISIS is JV. They cannot destroy America. If you doubt it, watch one of my interviews with General Boykin or any of the other ones that I've done on this topic, with Alan West or with Bolton or with Woolsey, where I discuss the proper principle. Nobody's talking about the principle that you should use, and no wonder Hillary Clinton thinks that the world is complicated. She has no principles to make sense of the world, and that's the main problem. So what is the decision that we have to make regarding terrorism and foreign policy? It's about that. It's about whether we should use self-defense as the principle. The principle there is we only go into war if we're attacked or in imminent threat of attack. But if there's a threat in a year or two, or like Alan West says, next century, then we don't go to war. We don't get involved in potential enemies generations away, centuries away. Why? Because all things can happen when they may materialize, they may not. It's a fool's errand to be fighting all the possibilities that the future, you could project into the future. So that's really what we should concentrate on, is what is the right principle. Now, I have tried to discuss this in several presentations and interviews, and so we need to decide whether we want to follow the Constitution or have a lawless government, and whether we want to have deterrence or preemption, or whether we want to guide our principle based on self-defense or other reasons for going to war, like humanitarian reasons. Our interests are at stake. Who knows what that means, and who knows where that leads us. And all of these Democratic candidates have bought into fighting ISIS to some degree or another, and unfortunately Bill Maher isn't influencing them enough. I've done a lot of these presentations on these topics. You can look at them and come to your own conclusions, or just look at the interviews that I do with the people that want the interventionism. I did a documentary on the war in Iraq, to invade or not invade. I interviewed James Woolsey, the CIA director. You can see that it's all a house of cards. Their reasoning just collapses. They contradict themselves. They say absurd things. And they throw up their hands like Hillary Clinton and say, the world is complicated. What can I do? Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the analysis.